Hey guys, Youngblood with you for your Should You Buy video on the new Drake Cutter. The Cutter is another addition to the starter ship lineup, competing at least in price with what most will compare to a few of the Auroras, the Mustang Alpha, and the surprisingly well-rounded Pisces. But let's start off focused on what the Cutter is, which is a $40 Warbond ship, $45 standard sale, or $60 ship and game package with a 6-month insurance. The cutter is 20 meters long, it is 16 meters wide, it's 6 meters tall, which basically makes it a small ship. But the design is fairly chunky or boxy. And honestly, if you've played Elite Dangerous, it looks a lot like the Diamondback Explorer, at least to my eye. That larger size, though, is what opens the door to carrying 4 SCU of cargo, and with a rear ramp and high enough ceilings, you're able to fit either a Greycat STV or a Drake Mule on board, which are vehicles, which opens up some new gameplay types, even if you're having to sacrifice the cargo hauling to be able to do that in the moment. The Cutter is a single-person ship, so there aren't any crew stations or turrets. However, there is a bed inside, so you could feasibly transport someone with the interior space should you need to. Speaking of that interior, I just mentioned a bed, which opens up the ability to stay out in space longer and log out from your ship instead of relying on a station to log out, which is a pretty big perk for a starter ship. Other than a bed and interior cargo or even vehicle space, you also have a bathroom module, which is a huge surprise considering even the upscaled Drake Cutlass doesn't even offer that feature. You also have a shelf where you can store some personal items, but internal ship storage for your food, ammo, weapons, and armor needs, which is a bigger perk. And while I haven't seen numbers on that, I would assume that the storage is pretty limited being a starter ship and is probably likely similar to an Aurora. There is a weapons rack as well where you have space for 2 pistols, a long arm weapon like a rifle, a large weapon like a railgun, and a slot for a utility tool or a med gun. Overall, the ship is extremely practically and usefully designed, even if not particularly attractive, at least to my eye. I know this question is going to come up, of what can carry the Cutter. The only ship in the game currently that can carry it is the 890 Jump. However, expect the Liberator and the Kraken, when they come out, they should be able to do the job once in place. But we'll need to see, for ships like the Javelin and the Idris, I assume they will be able to fit this. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. It doesn't really matter, though, because it would be really silly to fill a warship with this unless you're just helping a friend out. The weapons on the Cutter are very limited. You have 2 gimbaled size 1s on 2 size 2 hardpoints, so my assumption would be that you can max out at 2 fixed size 2s as an option if you would like to, though the 1s are probably a better bet with the current state of balance and how capacitors are playing out. You also have 2 missile racks and a deployable bay that each hold 2 size 1 missiles, so a total of 4 missiles default. Now you could potentially upsize those to 2 size 2 missiles, but I think in a ship like this, more missiles to tie up your attacker so you can escape is a better bet than 2 slightly upscaled missiles, as the same increase isn't really going to be what saves you. The SCM speeds here, they're expected to be 160 meters per second, so it's not particularly fast, but it's not out of character for a starter ship either. And with 2 main thrusters, 2 retro thrusters, 2 aux retros, which I assume is probably the VTOLs pivoting, and 12 maneuvering thrusters, it seems relatively well equipped from a thruster perspective. The FAQs, though, stated that the Mavs are undersized, so I would expect that this boxy ship is going to be decent at accelerating in a straight line, but it's going to struggle to change directions and not be considered to be nimble by any means. I already hinted at the VTOL thrusters a second ago, but the pivoting thrusters on the sides of the ship are going to be able to help land and take off easily, which is a really nice touch should you need help with rapid departures from outposts or you have a high gravity planet. And honestly, this is a feature that's not really seen on starter ships, so it's kind of a big perk there. Aside from that, the last 2 notable callouts are that despite having an interior, the Cutter does not have a docking collar for ship to ship, and on the cockpit, at least 2 of the more interior windows have a retractable canopy, which should provide some level of privacy, but should also, more importantly, help with some additional durability during a fight. For what it's worth, in lore, the cockpit glass is always some of the stronger material on a ship, so these shutters on ships are strange to me, like the Carrack and the Terrapin, and now the Cutter. Though I guess if you're wanting to protect something, protecting the your cockpit is probably the best bet, but it feels a little bit weird. Now, the part that most people are going to care about is going to be how this probably compares to the other ships that you may buy to make sure that you're picking out a good decision on the ship that you should take home. So the ships that I'm going to be really comparing here are going to be the Aurora LN, which is my preferred Aurora. The Aurora MR is performing really well in the game right now, but overall I think the LN is the better choice long term. You have the Mustang Alpha and the C8X Pisces. From a price perspective, the Cutter and the Pisces are the two most expensive at $45. And then you have the LN at $40 and the Alpha at $30. The Alpha, for the record, is probably one of the better valued ships in the game because it offers a lot. They're all very similar, being able to carry about 4 SCU of cargo, with the exception of the LN, which is going to bring in 3 SCU, which means they're all pretty even, though every SCU counts when you're talking these low levels. I mean, you're talking 25%. Now, the biggest differentiator here, though, is that the Cutter's the only one of this group that's able to actually carry a ground vehicle, albeit by sacrificing cargo. But if you pick the right mission and the right time to bring a vehicle, you can kind of choose your own adventure. In speed, the Alpha wins in a big way at 255 meters per second, followed by the LN at 185, the Cutter then at 160, and the Pisces bringing up the rear at 140. We don't know agility in-game for the Cutter yet, but I'm expecting it to be the worst, or at least similar to the Pisces, with the Alpha being best in class, followed by the LN. If you need a crew, then the Pisces is the only one with more seats. Though the Aurora and the Cutter both have beds for sitting, or at least laying down, and they provide that huge benefit of logging out. So not only can you log out in deep space, you could potentially bring somebody along, even though it may not be that great of a journey for them. Weapons-wise, the LN and the Alpha have the size 2 weapons with additional size 1s, which I think is better for future state. But the Pisces has 4 size 1s, which isn't bad at current state, making the Cutter feel anemic either way, especially with just mid-tier missiles on this grouping. One huge concern for the Cutter is the single size 1 shield, which means that it's on par with the much smaller Arrow, and if you compare the ships that we're actually talking about here, the Pisces. And considering the Pisces is really just a high-functioning snub, even with a lot of community love behind it, this isn't a characteristic that you want to match, and the Mustang and the Alpha come in on top with 2 size 1 shields. The Cutter does apparently have armor on its side, which probably pairs with its worst flight model because it's going to be heavier, so it's not without some redemption. Similar story to shields as with coolers, I'm afraid, where we see the Cutter and the Pisces coming in with 1 size 1 cooler compared to the Mustang and the Aurora rocking 2 size 1s, which is a much more standard loadout for the small ships. The single biggest difference in these ships for my taste is a big favor for the Cutter, and that's the fact that not only that it has 2 small fuel tanks for hydrogen, which matches the Aurora and the Mustang, but it also has 2 size 1 quantum tanks, which is unique to this group, meaning that while it may not travel faster because they all have the same size drive, but it can go for longer, and that is a huge benefit. And the last note here is that in comparison, is that the Cutter is a bit easier to pick up on radar because of the large cross section, so easier missile locks on you, and your threats will detect you from further away, which really aren't great qualities. So when we get to the should you buy section, as usual, the answer is it depends. First off, if you want to buy a starter ship and you want to carry a ground vehicle, then the Cutter is an easy choice because it's really the only option that is enabling you to be able to do that, at least until you pay up to the point of being able to get a Nomad. And for about an extra $35, I prefer that value because the Nomad is a lot more ship, but value is subjective as well. And even without spending to the point of having to get a Nomad, even south of that is, in price at least, is the Titan, which is one of the Avenger ships, which is only about $10 to $15 more. And that's a hell of a lot more ship and a lot more value. And honestly is where I almost recommend everybody start anyways, because the jump in price is inconsequential for most. Again, going back to the starters, if you want to favor combat, or even if you want to just dabble in some combat and you don't care about the vehicle hauling ability, don't get the Cutter. The small weapons output, the slow maneuverability, the relying on hull versus shields, it just spells expensive repairs and underwhelming performance. I personally kind of see the cutter as the starter exploration ship in that you can do trading, you can get a ground vehicle and go sightsee, you don't have to refuel as often because of the tanks, you have a bed that you can log out in, and some sparse living quarters. Overall for me, the cutter is the starter ship you pick if this is your only ship and this is the most money you're going to spend in the game. If, and a big if, you're planning to play a more passive and sightseeing, explore, trade, do missions. That's kind of how you plan to make a living. If you want to fight, really any of the other threes are going to be a better option. Overall, I dig it. The price is good. It's a good value for the price. And it lets you do a lot in the game. So for the right players who don't have other bigger and better ships in their fleet and are truly picking a ship to start the game with, then yeah, I think you should buy it, especially understanding where the game is going. Bigger star systems. Pyro is supposed to be huge. If you're not going to spend a lot of money in the game, you need big fuel tanks to go long distances to be able to get to the places you want without having to stop a lot of places along the way. So that's it for this video. If you guys have questions, please get them into the comments. Otherwise, stay tuned for a lot more coming soon. Have yourselves a wonderful day and take care.